friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Big Hugs Woodland. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my bear today in the center of the image, and I'm going to color him in some brown tones. So I've colored this image before, and I did it in fall colors. So today I wanted to just mix it up and do something more spring-like. So I wanted to change up the bear as well. So I'm going to do a brown bear using E31, E33, E35, and E37. So I'm starting with that E37 and laying in the shadows wherever I think they should go. So he is mainly facing forward. He's tilted a little bit toward the left. So his shadows are pretty much equal on both sides. I would say slightly more heavy on the right-hand side. And also just placing shadows where any of the other critters are overlapping his body, where those would be casting a shadow. Once I'm done with that, I blended that out with the E35, just making sure to go over the very edge of that E37 so it pulls that darker shade into this mid-tone. And then I'm going to do the same with the E33, just pull that color in even further. Because he is such a large image, I am choosing to use 4 shades on this guy. You probably could get away with just 3 if you wanted to, but I just like the extra dynamics with the little bit more highlight on the center of the body. So that's what I did, but it's really up to you. So I left that white space in the center of his face, on his muzzle, down the center of his chest and belly, also on the insides of his ears, and a little bit on the tops of his legs. And that is where I'm going to put my lightest shade, the E31. Now the E31 is quite a bit lighter than the E33, so I do have to work at it a bit to get these to blend. You can see that I'm doing small circular scribbling motions to kind of break up the color and help that blend a bit. I will also go back in with a second layer of the E33, kind of flicking that in toward the highlight area. And then I'll go back again with the E31 to just do a second layer of that as well. So I didn't do a second layer on the whole body, just those lightest 2 shades there. And then I'm going to move on to the deer, and I'm going to use E50, E51, E53, and E55. So again, I'm using 4 shades for the deer. And that's just because he has the 2-toned areas of his body, like around the eye, and I also wanted it to get softer at the belly. So I'm starting with the E55 and laying in my shadows for him. His shadows are a little bit different since he's facing toward the left. His shadows are predominantly down the right-hand side of his body, although I did put it on the left on his neck because his head would be casting a shadow there. And then I'm blending out that E55 with the E53, keeping the areas that are in the center or more rounded and more therefore reflected of light, like the hindquarters. Those are going to be where the light would hit the most. So that's where I left areas for highlight. But other than that, I filled everything in with the E51. Just left those few little places for the E50, transitioning onto the belly where I left a little bit of white space. And I also left a little bit of white space on the tip of the nose, right below the black part, the tip of the muzzle, I should have said. I'm going to use these shades for the bunny as well. I actually started with the E53 for the bunny because I wasn't quite sure how dark I wanted to go. And because he's facing toward the right, I put my shadows down the left. And I'm going to do him to be mostly brown, although I'm leaving a white area around his eye and on his muzzle, on his belly, and on one of his ears. So I blended down all the way to the E50, and then I wanted to come in and add some dot detail, just give him some texture and some little different patches. So I'm doing that with the E55, and then I'm going to start to blend that out with the E53, again just pouncing the tip of the marker over those areas and kind of softening it a bit and adding in a few extra of this lighter shade. And then I'm going to blend out once again with that E51. And I'm even going to take a little bit of colorless blender because I wanted the area around the eye to transition a bit softer. So I'm just going to trace the edge of that lightest shade, the E50, on the face and the belly, and then also on the ears. And then I did add a little E51 and E50 to the white parts of my fox as well. So just a touch of the E51 first, blend it out with the E50, and then leaving the rest white for the highlight. And then for the rest of my fox, I'm going to use YR12, YR14, and YR18. So I'm going to come in with the YR18, and much like the bear, the fox is mostly facing forward, although his body is turned toward the right. So I did do his shadows differently from his head to his body. His head has it, you know, kind of equal on both sides, but the body is mainly down the left side. And that's just because of the way that he is turned. So once I have the YR18 on there, I'm going to blend that out with the YR14, pulling that in toward the center of his face and toward the belly and toward the top of the tail. And then I'll use the YR12 to fill all the rest of that in. I am going to leave some more white space on the belly to kind of match the face. So I'm going to just blend that all out up to where I want that white, and then I'll go back to my E50 and just use that to kind of bridge the transition between those two areas. I'm also going to use the YR14 for my bird's beak and then for the centers of the flowers. So for the little deer's hoof, I used E44 and E47. And then for the squirrel, I decided to add in some kind of earthy grayish tones, kind of grayish. I went with E70, E71, and E74. I know a lot of you are probably shocked because red squirrels are actually my favorite animal, but I just felt like I wanted to break up some of these browns with something that was just a little bit more muted and toned down. So that's why I went with these shades, and I really like how he turned out. So I used the E74 for the shadows and then blended out with the E71 and then finished with the E70 and again left a little white space on the belly. For the bird, I wanted to incorporate the color that I wanted to add into this scene to make it a little bit more of a springtime card, and that shade is purple. So I went with V22, V25, and V28, putting the darkest, the V28, on the tip of the tail and the tip of the wing and the back of the head, and then blending forward. And I actually am going to add in the V20 as well on the area around the eye and on the belly. And then I wanted to give everybody some rosy cheeks, so I'm using R000, R11, and R20 for that. I'll also color the insides of any ears that need that. So just using the R20 first. And then for some of the animals that are kind of darker in color, I'm just going to leave the R20. I didn't even blend it out. For others, I'll go ahead and blend out with the R11. And then if they are really pale, I will blend out even further with the R000, which really softens things up and just makes it look a bit more natural. And I forgot to do the bunny's tail, so I went back to my E70 for that. For the flowers, I wanted them to be a different purple than the bird, so I went with V04, VO5 and VO6, and I'm just going to color all of them the same. I wanted it to be the same flower kind of growing in little clusters on this little scene here. So I used the VO6 down at the bottom of the flowers and then blended up with the VO5. And then I'm going to use the VO4 for the highlight. I didn't feel like there was enough contrast there though, so I am going to end up adding in a fourth shade as well. And I'm going to go a bit darker, and this darker shade is also going to help kind of tie in a little bit more with the darker shades in the bird. So I pulled in VO9 and just added a tiny touch of that at the bottom of each blossom, and then blended that back out with a little bit of the VO6 again. I didn't go over the whole flowers again because I didn't want them to get too dark, but just enough to blend that out. And then for all of the greenery, I'm going to use YG03, YG05, and YG07. So I'm starting with the YG07 and putting a little bit of that at the base of each of the leaves and also the grass. And then I'm going to blend that out with the YG05 in the center and just save some room on the tip of each of those leaves and the grass for the YG03, which has a bit more of a yellow tone to it, so it looks really fresh and spring-like, which is why I went with this combo. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to grab my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just get that started off to the side. Mine kind of gets dry and crusty, so I always have to scribble it a little bit to get it flowing, but this just adds a nice raised glossy texture to the eyes that just brings your critters to life. And then once I'm done with that, I will trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I have taken a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock and trimmed that down with the fourth largest of the nesting decal A2s from Hello Bluebird. And I'm going to blend on some shaded lilac Distress Oxide ink on this piece. I'm going to put it in the center toward the top. I want to leave room down at the bottom to stamp a sentiment later on. So I'm just making that darker in the center and then letting it fade off toward the edges. Then I wanted to add some distressing to that, so I'm spritzing some clean, clear water onto an acrylic block. I'll pick that up with a thin paintbrush and then tap that all over that background. And I'm going to allow that water to react with the Distress Oxide inks for a few seconds, and then blot that up with a paper towel, and then I'll lift some of that color away. And then I could see that in a couple places I wanted to do a little bit more, so I did that a second time and blotted that up once again. I'm also going to take some of that shaded lilac and press it onto the acrylic block, mix it up with the water that was still left over on it, and then just tap that all around the panel so I get a nice fine spray of dots just to give it some extra depth and movement. And then I'll set this panel aside to dry. Once it has, I wanted to stamp my sentiment down at the bottom, and I decided to go with Dusty Concord Distress Oxide ink. And I'm taking the Sending Hugs two-piece parts of the sentiment. There's a bunch of different sentiments that you can build with this stamp set, but this is the one that I decided to do. So I'm just going to stamp that down twice to make sure I have a nice bold impression. And then I'll pop that out and set that aside and put my card base in my MISTI instead. I'm using MFT's Grapesicle cardstock, and I'm just going to keep using this Dusty Concord Distress Oxide ink because I think it's a good match for this color cardstock. And I took another one of the images with the hugging fox and raccoon, and I continued the sentiment on the inside that says, and happy thoughts your way. So the whole thing will say, sending hugs and happy thoughts your way. Then I'll take a piece of pattern paper from the Simple Stories Bunnies and Blooms 6x8 pad, and I'm going to trim that down with my paper trimmer to be 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So it'll be 1/4 inch shorter than my A2 standard size card. And this is such a good match for that grapesicle cardstock as well. I'm going to glue that down in the center and just make sure that it is lined up on there nice and straight before I smooth that down into place. And then I have added some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back of the focal panel so I can give it some dimension and give it a little extra oomph to those deckled edges because it gives it a bit of drop shadow. And then I can bring in my images. So I'm going to take some liquid glue and add that to the back of my critters. I'm not adding any to the back of the fox or the deer's tail because I want to be able to tuck my flowers back behind those. So I'm just lining that up where I want them to go, and then I'll grab those flowers really quick before that glue dries and just tuck those flowers in so that they're kind of coming up on either side and framing in these adorable critters having their group hug. So I'll adjust those until I like how they're looking and then press everything down. And then I just have these 3 little pieces of grass that I wanted to use to ground them into the scene. So I'm going to add one on the left, one on the right, and then one in the center. I'll take that shortest one and just add that right in front of the bear's feet. And I think that really helps to give them, you know, something to stand on. So I wanted to take a few sparkling clear sequins and just scatter those throughout around the images to give it a little extra something special. So I'm just picking those up with my Studio Katia embellishment wand and then adding a drop of my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue underneath. And I'm going to do that for all of those. Then I'll let them dry for maybe a minute or so, and I'll come in with some Stardust Stickles and just fill in the centers of the sequins to give it a little bit of extra sparkle. So I'm just adding a little dollop there and trying to keep it right in the center. My bottle is getting pretty low, so it's a little tricky to squeeze it without the air kind of pushing the stickles out everywhere. So yeah, but anyway, once I was done with the centers of the sequins, I also put it on the centers of the flowers just to have it one other little place on the card. And if it got, you know, too out of hand, I could just kind of wipe it up with my finger to just remove it and redo it, since they were just such a small little area, but I think it just adds a nice little touch. So I'll lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the sparkle and shimmer and also a closer look. And then there's another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. And all of the products that I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below. If you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. And thank you so much for watching and spending your time with me today. I really appreciate it. It means the world, and I just can't thank you guys enough. I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.